Godot 4.4 just released, and this time it's packed full of features that will completely change how you work with the engine. So, let's take a look at them. The new game window tab lets you play your game directly inside Godot, but besides that, it lets you pause the game and step it frame by frame, as well as change modes to select your in-game objects with the mouse. You can also click the camera icon to override your game's camera and move it in any way you want. Using this, you can easily select your objects and change them while the game is running. And when you're ready, go back to input mode and re-enable player controls. You can toggle the camera icon to return to your game's camera, or use the debug camera, your choice. You can also use the floating window option to keep its new debug functions on a new window. There are a lot of big features like this, but let's check out some other interesting ones first. You can now set favorites for your node's properties. This will place them at the top of the inspector. So now you can keep all those transform variables right at the top, where they are easily accessible. No more scrolling down trying to find them. You can now quickly move objects around with the reposition hotkey. Pressing the hotkey while the object is selected will move it where the mouse is, based on its shape. Now it is very easy to reposition your objects around the scene. Collision shapes can now have custom colors. You can now customize the collision color, which is very helpful for making zone triggers. And there is a lot more going on. Gridmaps have received some major enhancements to improve their usability. Tiles now appear in the bottom panel with new updated controls. While placing tiles, now a ghost preview of the tile will show up under the cursor. You can rotate tiles quickly with hotkeys or the buttons below for fast placements, and use the selection mode to select a group of tiles. Move them around by cutting the selection, duplicate them, and even rotate the whole selection, making it much easier to create maps using Gridmaps. The transform mode allows you to navigate the grid map easily while editing. Enabling it will unlock navigation controls so you can move around. Then turn it off and go back to create your map. And that's not all. You can now customize your grid color for better visibility. And changes to the grid map preview size now update immediately. Particle spawn areas now have gizmos. You can now visualize the particle spawn area and don't have to guess anymore. The ability to change the gizmo size with the mouse is not here yet, and will be added later due to some problems. But for now, we can see the gizmos changing by altering their values in the inspector. Particle sub-emitters now have the ability to spawn at the start. Particle systems can now seek a custom position in time. You can use this to advance your particles to a given position, or even use this to debug how particles work by scrolling the time in any way you want. There is now a spring bone for all your 3D model animation needs. You can add them to your skeleton and make your character jiggle all around. Especially useful for hair meshes. There is now a Look At modifier 3D that makes it really easy to change your animation dynamically. It also comes with a lot of options to refine the effect and get exactly what you want, such as limiting the angles and how it moves to the target. Animation keyframes will now auto-update when you change them. No more scrolling around the timeline to force them to update. You can now create animation markers, name them, and give them colors. Enable this option to display their names, and play the animation only around the two selected markers if you want. The project manager also had some changes. It now starts with a larger size for better usability, and you can now import new projects without immediately opening them. Just uncheck the Edit Now and your project will be imported without opening them. And for broken projects, you can now open projects in recovery mode. This will disable some features and automated recovery systems to allow you to at least open the project to diagnose your problems and salvage some parts of the project. After you're done, you can use the yellow button at the top to restart the project in normal mode. Godot now will finally remember the window's position and size. You can also change how it works in the editor settings. For 3D, we now have a way to measure distances. You can now take quick measurements of your game's world. You can see the camera's preview inside the inspector when they're selected now, making it much easier to adjust your cameras. The Curve 3D now has its own closed property. Enabling it will close the curve and make it loop. The cylinder gizmos has been upgraded. You can now expand its size by dragging only the top or the bottom to easily control it. The scene tree have had some big optimizations to make them faster to update, and you can now scroll horizontally to fully see all the node names. You can now quickly change your 3D navigation commands to mimic other applications if you want. There is now a very easy method to add buttons to the inspector. You can create inspector buttons with the Add Export To decorator. Creating debug buttons has never been easier. No more messing around with get property lists anymore. And Gdscript now supports typed dictionaries. Using the correct type in them will give you a much better display of their values in the inspector. The Gdscript editor has got some incredible new addition. You can now hover over any code element in your script to display its documentation. It works for functions, properties, classes, and even local variables. The script editor will now highlight the current sync scripts to help you find the scripts you want. Plugins have some additions too. You now have a way to add more options to several context menus throughout Godot, be it inside the code, on-screen tabs, or even in the scene itself. And there is now a proper way to move your scene's camera using a plugin now. The profiler window has also received some love. You now have the option to auto-start the profiler and visual profiler when starting the game, making it much easier to debug initialization issues. You'll see a yellow warning icon on the top to show that auto-start is enabled. The visual profiler will now show your CPU and GPU models at the top. And you can now zoom in and pan around inside the profiler window to see those lines up close. And now, some minor but very important things. The quick open window now uses fuzzy search, which means you don't need to type the exact file name anymore. A few letters from the file is enough to open the file you want. You can now right-click any asset inside the quick open window and use the Show in File System option to quickly go to that file. This also works for sprites inside the Animated Sprites node. Another great addition is the new search filter option. How many times have you wanted to quickly search for some node, only to have to spend time opening the hierarchies and look for the correct one? Now you can enable the Hide Filter Out Parent option to display only the filtered nodes, making it much easier to find and select what you want. You can now scale multiple canvas objects together. Use the scale mode or hold Ctrl and Alt together. And you can also hold Shift to keep the aspect ratio. Curves have had a much needed upgrade. You can now set their values beyond 0 and 1, both in the Y and the X direction. You can save swatches as resources now, to save your colors for later, or to get them into other projects. You can pin the bottom panel to prevent them from automatically switching around. Deleting files will now show you what files are being deleted. Mesh libraries can now change the shadow properties of objects inside them, individually. Path 3D now have less fishbones to make them less cluttered. Navigation links will now display arrows to indicate their direction, so you can easily see where AI maps go to. Saving objects as scenes now have options to reset their position, scale, and rotation, so you don't have to manually move them to the center after creating them anymore. The global illumination baking has seen some significant advancements. Petsy was added to speed up compression on baked light maps. This was a much needed addition, reducing bake times from 90 seconds down to half a second when working on HK HDRs. The Lightmap GI node now supports transparency, which is a great improvement for maps that use them. There is also now support for shadow masks. To use them, make sure to select Shadow Mask mode and rebake your Lightmap GI node. You can set your shadow mask modes to replace or to overlay existing shadows. And there is even now support for baked colored shadows. The AGX tone map has been added, giving you more control over your game's visual appearance. Who hasn't had to deal with shader stutters? Now, Uber Shaders has come to the rescue. They are a way to reduce the stutters caused by shader compilation during runtime. They work by having a precompiled big shader with a lot of features that is used in place of your real shader until that is compiled and replaced. This should help in a lot of cases, without any modifications to your games. Now Godot non-resource files like scripts and shaders should generate a .uid file to keep track of things, and make sure your project stays safe when moving things around. When you start your old projects now, you'll be prompted to upgrade it, and Godot will create all the UID files needed for you. 3D model files still doesn't have thumbnails, which is very annoying. This aims to fix it. This feature will add basic thumbnails to 3D models inside your project panel. The Polygon UV editor has changed locations and name. It is now called Polygon, and it is at the bottom of the screen now. Web builds now support MIDI audio. You can now create a twin that ignores a game timescale, which is helpful to keep your UI twin animations fluid inside of slow motions. And twins can now have subtwins for a more precise and complex twinning actions. Multimeshes now has an option to use indirect draw, improving its performance, especially for dense scenes like grass fields. Jolt is now fully part of Godot, and you no longer need to install a separate add-on. This means it will perform better, and you can enable it for any project for a much better and stable 3D physics performance. Just go to the project settings, change the physics engines to Jolt Physics, and restart your project. You can now interpolate 3D objects too, These will render their interpolated positions to display them smoothly even if your physics frame is low. It is especially useful to make your games run smoothly on high-frequency monitors while keeping the same physics frame. Visual shaders now have a preview window. You can use its tool menu to quickly copy your shader's parameters into the visual shader nodes, change the parameters for the preview mesh, and later copy the changes back to your selected shader object. 2D shaders can now declare an instance uniform. This will make the shader parameters unique between each object's instance. You can change each of them without affecting each other. There is now an export zip option to quickly pack your project into a zip file. The project and editor settings windows will now always search with the advanced options turned on, so you don't miss the options you are looking for. But that's it. A really big update with incredible new features and a lot of improvements. I hope you liked this video, and until next time.